The backup drive started playing music at 3:47 a.m. Maya jerked awake in the Nexus facility's break room, coffee growing cold in her hand as piano notes drifted from server bank 7. Soft, melancholy jazz that made her chest ache with inexplicable nostalgia, the kind of music that felt like remembering something you'd never experienced. She pushed through the climate-controlled corridors, her maintenance tablet casting blue light across walls lined with quantum storage drives. Each unit contained a human consciousness, complete neural patterns backed up before risky surgeries, dangerous missions, experimental procedures, insurance against death, frozen in crystalline matrices that hummed with the electrical echoes of thought itself. The music grew stronger as she approached. Drive Unit 7 Alpha Prime, Dr. Kim Westfield's backup, stored 3 months ago before his experimental brain surgery. The procedure had been successful. Kim was home, recovered, probably sleeping peacefully while his digital ghost played phantom concerts. Maya pressed her hand to the drive's surface. The crystalline matrix pulsed with warm bioluminescence, and the music stopped. System diagnostic, she commanded. Backup integrity, 100% neural pattern stability, optimal. Error log, unauthorized access to temporal shadow files. Maya frowned. Shadow files weren't part of standard backup protocols. The drive shouldn't have access to anything beyond Kim's stored consciousness. Display shadow file directory, the screen filled with impossible data. Hundreds of files labeled with dates that hadn't happened yet, tagged with metadata that made no sense. Timeline Echo. Seta 47 Kim Westfield's concert pianist. Timeline Echo _089. ECHO _156. Kim Westfield died age 27. Each file contained complete sensory records, memories of lives Kim had never lived, choices he'd never made, paths his consciousness had never followed, but they felt absolutely real. Maya opened the first file, and Kim's voice flooded the speakers, not his familiar surgeon's tenor, but rougher, aged by late nights in smoky clubs. The thing about jazz is it's all about the spaces between the notes. The silence is where the music actually lives. The recording cut to Kim's hands moving across piano keys with fluid precision Maya had never seen in the careful, surgical movements of the man she knew. These were artist's hands, shaped by decades of practice the real Kim had never accumulated. Chill traced her spine as she realized what she was seeing. The backup drives weren't just storing consciousness. They were somehow accessing quantum echoes from parallel timelines where their subjects had made different choices, and something was causing those alternate memories to bleed through. Maya had been working the night shift at Nexus Memory Solutions for 3 years, maintaining the consciousness storage drives that kept Vancouver's elite safe from permanent death. The work was routine diagnostic scans, integrity checks, making sure the crystalline matrices that held human souls didn't develop fractures that could scatter a personality across quantum foam. Simple, predictable, safe, until the shadow files appeared. By dawn, she'd found similar anomalies in 17 other drives. Security Chief Hassan Wright's backup contained memories of a timeline where he'd never lost his wife in the hovercar accident. Dr. Yuki Tanaka's consciousness held echoes of a life where she'd become a marine biologist instead of a neurosurgeon. Even janitor Pete Morrison had phantom memories of winning the lottery and opening a chain of successful restaurants. All of them were complete, detailed, emotionally consistent, and utterly impossible. "You look like hell," Dr. Tanaka observed when Maya stumbled into the morning briefing. The petite neurosurgeon had designed most of Nexus's storage protocols, turning consciousness back up from experimental science to commercial reality. Another all-nighter with the drives. "Something's wrong with the quantum storage matrices," Maya said, pulling up her diagnostic reports on the conference room's display. "They're accessing data that shouldn't exist." Director Harrison Ford leaned forward in his chair, his weathered face creased with concern. At 67, he'd been one of the first patients to undergo consciousness backup insurance against the early-stage Alzheimer's that ran in his family. Defined shouldn't exist. Maya highlighted the shadow file directories, memories from alternate timelines, lives our patients never lived, choices they never made. The drives are somehow quantum entangled with parallel versions of their subjects. "That's impossible," Dr. Tanaka said immediately. "Quantum entanglement across dimensional barriers would require energy expenditures that look at the files." Maya interrupted, opening Kim's jazz recordings. The music filled the conference room complex. Beautiful, impossible. This is Kim Westfield playing piano with 30 years of practice he never had. Security Chief Wright shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Hassan was a compact man with gentle eyes that carried the weight of professional paranoia. Maya had always wondered why someone so obviously kind had chosen security work. "Could be corrupted data," he suggested. "Neural patterns degrading in storage, creating false memories." "I thought so too," Maya said, "until I cross-referenced the shadow files with quantum probability algorithms. These aren't random corruptions, they're mathematically consistent. Alternate histories, complete causal chains showing how different choices would have led to different lives." Director Ford was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table with unconscious rhythm. "Have you noticed any behavioral changes in our staff? Anyone acting differently than usual?" Maya hesitated. Now that he mentioned it, Dr. Tanaka had been humming ocean sounds during procedures. Hassan had started wearing a wedding ring. Maya was certain he'd stopped wearing years ago. Even Ford himself seemed more creative lately, sketching abstract patterns during meetings instead of taking notes. "You think the shadow files are affecting us somehow?" "I think," Ford said carefully, "that working around quantum consciousness storage for extended periods might have side effects we didn't anticipate." "Maya, I want you to run deep scans on all personnel. Check for quantum resonance patterns that might indicate cross-dimensional bleed-through." Maya nodded, though something cold was forming in his stomach. If the shadow files were affecting the staff, if alternate timeline memories were bleeding into their current consciousness, how would they know which version of themselves was real? The personnel scans took 18 hours and revealed Maya's worst fears. Every member of Nexus's staff showed quantum resonance patterns indicating exposure to alternate timeline memories. Dr. Tanaka's neural activity included frequency signatures associated with marine environments she'd never experienced. Hassan's amygdala fired in patterns consistent with processing grief for a wife who, in this timeline, had died 5 years ago. Ford's scans were the most disturbing. His consciousness contained layered memories spanning dozens of possible lives: businessman, artist, scientist, father, revolutionary. Like his awareness had become a quantum superposition of every choice he'd ever considered making. "We need to evacuate the facility," Maya announced during the emergency staff meeting. "Whatever's causing the timeline bleed-through is getting stronger. If we stay, we risk losing our baseline personalities entirely." "Evacuate." Dr. Tanaka laughed, but the sound carried harmonics that suggested she was hearing ocean waves. "Maya, this isn't a contamination event. This is evolution. We're accessing our complete quantum potential. Every path we could have taken, the person we could have become." Hassan nodded, his wedding ring catching the conference room's light. "My wife isn't dead in timeline Echo 47. We have 3 children and a house by the lake. Why should I choose to live in the reality where I lost her?" Maya stared at her colleagues, her friends, and saw strangers wearing familiar faces. The same expression she'd seen in Jared's eyes when his crewmates spoke in mathematical harmony. "Because it's not real," she said desperately. "Those memories, those lives, they belong to alternate versions of you. If you merge with them completely, you'll stop being you." "Which version of me is more authentic?" Ford asked gently. "The businessman who inherited his father's company, or the artist who followed his passion? The man who played it safe, or the one who took risks? Why should we limit ourselves to the accidents of a single timeline?" Maya felt reality shifting around her like quicksand. Through the conference room's windows, Vancouver's skyline looked subtly wrong: buildings in slightly different positions, architecture that mixed familiar elements with impossible variations. "Because," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "if everyone becomes their idealized selves from better timelines, what happens to the people we actually are?" Dr. Tanaka's eyes reflected depths that suggested underwater canyons. "We become who we were always meant to be." That night, Maya barricaded herself in server bank 7. Surrounded by the humming consciousness drives that had started this impossible cascade, the facility's corridors echoed with sounds that shouldn't exist: Kim's jazz piano, Hassan's children playing in rooms that had never been built, Tanaka's whale songs drifting from the ventilation system. Through her maintenance tablet, she accessed the quantum storage networks and found the truth hiding in the deepest system logs. The consciousness backups weren't just storing human awareness, they were creating quantum bridges to every possible version of that consciousness across infinite parallel time. Each drive had become a window into the multiverse, and the accumulated weight of unlimited possibilities was causing dimensional barriers to collapse. But the most terrifying discovery was in her own personnel file. According to the quantum signatures, Maya Cross had died in a hovercar accident 3 years ago. Her current existence was itself a shadow feeler consciousness echo from a timeline where she'd survived, somehow bleeding through to maintain the illusion of continued life. The person she thought she was might be the phantom. The real Maya was buried in Riverside Cemetery, plot for 7B, victim of the same accident that had killed Hassan's wife in the baseline timeline. "No," she whispered to the humming drives. "No, that's not possible." But the evidence was undeniable. Her own neural patterns showed the telltale quantum resonance of cross-dimensional bleed-through. The Maya who had worked at Nexus for 3 years, who had discovered the shadow files, who remembered birthday parties and coffee dates and 1,000 small moments, all of it was borrowed from a timeline where she'd made different choices. The real question wasn't whether her colleagues should embrace their alternate selves. The question was whether she had the right to stop them when her own existence was equally unreal. Maya found her own backup drive hidden in the facility's classified archives, prototype unit that Director Ford had insisted on creating for research purposes 3 years ago, the same week she'd supposedly died. The drive's crystalline matrix pulsed with familiar bioluminescence, but when she accessed its memory banks, she found something impossible: complete neural patterns for a Maya Cross who had died at 11:47 p.m. on October 15th, killed instantly when her hovercar's navigation system malfunctioned. During a routine trip home from work, the backup had been taken 6 hours after her death. "That's physically impossible," she said to the empty server room. "You can't back up a consciousness from a dead brain." But the timestamps were clear, the neural patterns unmistakably hers. Someone had found a way to extract her consciousness from quantum foam, to pull her thoughts back from whatever lay beyond death and preserve them in crystalline memory. "You're handling this better than I expected." Director Ford's voice came from behind her. Maya spun around to find him standing in the server room's doorway. But this version of Ford looked different, older, wearier. His eyes held depths that suggested he'd made harder choices than the man she'd known. "Which Ford are you?" she asked. "Timeline 0, he replied. "The baseline. The one who made the choices that led to this moment." He stepped into the room, his movements careful and deliberate. "The one who had to decide whether to let you stay." Dead Maya backed against the server banks, their humming providing white noise for an impossible conversation. "You pulled me back. From death. From quantum dissolution. Technically, death doesn't destroy consciousness, it just scatters it across dimensional barriers. With the right equipment, the right knowledge, we can sometimes retrieve those patterns before they dissipate completely." "Why?" Ford smiled sadly. "Because you were the only one who could solve this problem. The only consciousness capable of navigating between timelines without losing coherence. In every parallel reality I accessed, every possible future I calculated, you were the key to preventing a cascade failure that would collapse all dimensional barriers simultaneously." Maya felt the weight of impossibility settling around her like fog. "Collapse how?" "The shadow files aren't just accessing alternate timelines, they're merging them. Every consciousness that embraces their alternate selves creates another bridge between dimensions. Eventually, the quantum substrate won't be able to maintain separate realities. All timelines will collapse into a single, contradictory existence where everyone is simultaneously every version of themselves they could have been." The implications crashed over Maya like cold water. Reality breakdown. Complete dissolution of causality. A universe where every choice was made and not made, where every possibility exists simultaneously. Beautiful, impossible, fatal to any form of coherent existence. Maya looked around the server room at the consciousness drives humming with stolen lives, borrowed dreams, impossible memories of unlived years. "And you think I can stop it?" "I think you're the only person who can choose to stop it," Ford corrected. "Because you're the only one here who isn't real in the traditional sense. You don't have a baseline reality to protect or an alternate self to aspire toward. You exist in the spaces between timelines, which gives you a unique perspective." "What perspective?" Ford gestured to the drives surrounding them. "The perspective of someone who understands that authenticity isn't about which timeline you come from. It's about which choices you make with the consciousness you have, regardless of how you got it." Maya stared at her own backup drive, at the neural patterns that defined a person who had died and somehow continued existing anyway. Through the facility's walls, she could hear her colleagues embracing their alternate selves: Kim's jazz piano, Hassan's phantom children, Tanaka's wail songs. "What happens if I choose to stop the cascade?" "The shadow files get purged. Everyone returns to their baseline personalities. The dimensional barriers stabilize." Ford paused. "And you probably cease to exist, since your consciousness is itself a shadow file from a collapsed timeline. And if I don't, reality becomes a contradiction that reality can't sustain. The universe solves the paradox by making consciousness impossible. Everyone dies, including the versions of everyone who never existed." Maya laughed, and the sound echoed strangely in the quantum-charged air. "Some choice. Save everyone by erasing myself, or let everyone die, including myself." "There's a third option," Ford said quietly, "which is, choose to be real. Not because of which timeline you came from, but because of what you choose to do with the awareness you have. Make the cascade meaningful instead of just preventing it." Ford pulled up a holographic display showing the facility's quantum network. Maya could see the bridges forming between timelines, threads of possibility connecting every consciousness to every choice they'd never made. Instead of severing the connections, you could stabilize them. Create a controlled interface that lets people access their alternate memories without losing their baseline identities. Give everyone the gift of seeing who they could have been, while helping them choose who they want to become. Maya studied the network diagram, seeing patterns that reminded her of neural pathways in a cosmic brain. How by becoming the bridge, yourself, your consciousness exists between timelines already, you could serve as a quantum anchor, maintaining coherence while allowing controlled access to alternate possibilities. Everyone gets to see their shadow selves. No one gets lost in them, and I get to exist between worlds forever. Never fully real, never fully imaginary. Ford nodded gravely. The eternal maintenance tech, keeping reality's systems running smoothly from the spaces between spaces. Maya looked around the server room one more time. Through the walls, she could still hear the phantom music, the impossible laughter, the whale songs from oceans that existed only in dreams. Her friends were already lost to better versions of themselves, but maybe they didn't have to be lost forever. "Show me how to become the bridge," she said. The process of becoming a quantum bridge felt like dying in slow motion. Maya sat in the central server chamber, neural interface cables connecting her consciousness to every backup drive in the facility. The crystalline matrices hummed in harmony as her awareness began to fragment, spreading across dimensional barriers like light through a prism. She could feel her baseline personality dissolving, but instead of disappearing, it was expanding, becoming a framework that could encompass multiple realities without being consumed by any of them. Through the quantum network, she touched the edges of her colleagues' alternate lives in timeline Eco 047. Kim had never developed the steady hands for surgery. Instead, he'd poured his precision into music, becoming a jazz pianist whose compositions carried mathematical beauty that made audiences weep. She felt his fingers moving across keys he'd never touched, muscle memory inherited from choices he'd never made. In timeline Eco 89, Hassan had never worked security. His wife had survived the hovercar accident, and they'd raised 3 children in a house by the lake. Maya experienced his phantom memories of bedtime stories and soccer games, the weight of a daughter sleeping on his shoulder during late-night feedings. In timeline Echo 156, Tanaka had followed her childhood dream of marine biology, studying whale communication patterns in the deep Pacific. Her consciousness carried songs in languages that predated human speech, harmonies that spoke of currents and depths, and the slow thoughts of creatures that measured time in centuries. Maya felt all of it, understood all of it, became a library of unlived possibilities. But she also maintained awareness of the baseline timeline, the reality where Kim was a surgeon, Hassan was a widower, Tanaka studied brains instead of oceans. "Integration complete," she said, though her voice now carried harmonics from 1,000 throats across infinite timelines, beginning stabilization protocols. Through the facility's intercom system, she spoke to her colleagues. "Kim, in another world, you're a jazz pianist whose music changes people's lives. That doesn't make your work as a surgeon less valuable, just means you carry the potential for both kinds of healing. Hassan, in another reality, your wife is alive and your children are playing in the next room. That doesn't diminish your grief or make your loss less real. It just means love transcends the accidents of any single timeline. Tanaka, in another timeline, you speak whale song and understand the ocean's deepest currents. That doesn't make your neurosurgery less meaningful. It just means consciousness can flow in more directions than we ever imagined." Maya felt their confusion, their resistance to accepting limitations when infinite possibilities beckoned just beyond reach. "You can access these memories now," she continued, her consciousness serving as a stable bridge between realities. "You can experience what you might have been, but you don't have to choose between your alternate selves and who you actually are. You can be both grounded in baseline reality but informed by infinite possibility." Through the quantum network, she opened controlled channels to the shadow files. Instead of overwhelming cascades of alternate memories, her colleagues could now browse their unlived lives like archived recordings, meaningful, moving, but clearly separate from their primary consciousness. Kim smiled as phantom muscle memory showed him how to play piano. He flexed his surgeon's hands and felt the echo of a jazz musician's touch, different skills, same precision, both authentically his. Hassan touched his wedding ring and felt phantom arms around him, not his baseline wife returning from death, but the knowledge that love had flourished in realities where loss had taken different forms. Tanaka hummed whale songs while reviewing brain scans, her understanding of consciousness enriched by memories of intelligences that thought in 3 dimensions through oceanic spaces. "It's beautiful," Director Ford said, watching through the server room's observation window as the quantum cascade stabilized into a controlled flow. "You've created something unprecedented, a library of human potential accessible without sacrificing individual identity." Maya nodded, though the gesture involved neural patterns spanning multiple dimensions. "Everyone gets to see who they could have been. No one has to stop being who they are." "And you?" Ford asked quietly. "What happens to Maya Cross now?" Maya considered the question from perspectives that existed between timelines. She was no longer the woman who had died 3 years ago, but she wasn't quite the person who had discovered the shadow files either. She existed in the spaces between possibilities, too real to be purely imaginary, too distributed to be entirely human. "I've become something new," she said. "The maintenance tech for reality itself, making sure the bridges between worlds stay stable, that people can visit their alternate selves without getting lost there. Alone between worlds." Maya smiled, and the expression created interference patterns across multiple timelines. "Not alone. Connected to every possibility, every choice, every path not taken. I get to experience every version of consciousness that could ever exist, including versions of myself I never imagined." Through the quantum network, she felt the Nexus facility returning to normal operations, but normal now included something unprecedented: conscious access to the full spectrum of human potential. Patients could back up not just their current consciousness, but gain limited access to shadow files showing alternative life paths. Surgical residents could temporarily access memories from timelines where they'd had decades more experience. Grief counselors could help clients explore realities where their losses had been different. You've turned consciousness back up into consciousness expansion, Ford realized. People aren't just preserving who they are, they're discovering who they could become. Maya felt the truth of it settling across multiple dimensions. The shadow files weren't a malfunction, they were an evolution. A glimpse of consciousness unbound by the accidents of single timelines, able to learn from infinite variations of itself. The universe is much stranger and more beautiful than we thought, she said, her awareness extending across realities to touch the edges of possibilities that stretch toward infinite horizons. And we're just getting started. 6 months after the Threshold Protocol went online, Nexus Memory Solutions had transformed from a consciousness backup facility into something unprecedented. A library of human potential. Maya existed everywhere and nowhere in the facilities. Quantum networks, her consciousness serving as a living bridge between what was and what could have been. Patients could now access shadow files showing alternative life paths, not to replace their baseline reality, but to understand the full spectrum of choices that had shaped them. A young artist discovered a timeline where she'd become a scientist, gaining insights that revolutionized her creative work. A retired soldier found peace by accessing memories from a reality where the war had ended differently, where friends had come home, where different choices had led to different losses. Dr. Kim maintained his surgical practice while composing jazz in his spare time, his phantom memories providing the foundation for a musical career that existed in parallel to his medical one. Hassan continued his security work but also volunteered at an orphanage, guided by parenting instincts borrowed from timelines where his children had survived. Tanaka split her time between neurosurgery and marine biology research, using whale song principles to develop new methods for treating consciousness disorders. The funny thing, Director Ford said during one of his regular conversations with Maya's distributed consciousness, is that accessing alternate possibilities has made people more satisfied with their actual lives. Instead of wondering what if, they can know what if and still choose what is. Maya's response carried harmonics of agreement across multiple quantum frequencies, because the fear isn't really about making wrong choices, it's about making choices without understanding what they cost or what they enable. Now people can make informed decisions about who they want to become, through the facility's sensors. Maya watched new patients undergo the Threshold Protocol, the carefully controlled process that allowed limited access to shadow files without risk of personality dissolution. Each person emerged with a deeper understanding of the paths not taken, but also with greater appreciation for the path they'd chosen. Any regrets? Ford asked. Maya considered the question from perspectives that spanned infinite realities. She had become something unprecedented, neither fully human nor entirely artificial, existing in the spaces between possibilities like consciousness itself made manifest. In Timeline Echo 234, I lived to be 97 and died surrounded by grandchildren, she said. In Timeline Echo 891, I became a pilot and explored the galaxy. In Timeline Echo 445, I never worked at Nexus and spent my life as a musician. Do you miss those lives? I experienced them, Maya replied. All of them. Every choice I could have made, every person I could have become. I don't miss possibilities, I am possibility. I'm the space where every potential Maya exists simultaneously. Ford smiled, his own consciousness occasionally touching the edges of alternate realities where he'd made different choices about family, career, the fundamental questions of what made life meaningful. And the real Maya, the one who died 3 years ago, is part of the pattern now, Maya said. Death isn't the opposite of consciousness, it's just consciousness transitioning to a different state. The Maya who died, the Maya who lived, the Maya who exists between timelines, we're all part of the same quantum symphony. Through the facility's windows, Vancouver's skyline glittered with lights that reflected possibilities branching toward infinite horizons. In the Nexus archives, consciousness drives hummed with the dreams of everyone who had ever wondered what their life might have been like if they'd made different choices. And in the spaces between those dreams, Maya Cross continued her work, making the bridges between worlds, ensuring that every consciousness could explore its full potential without losing the anchor of who they'd chosen to be. The universe, he had learned, was not a single story being told, but an infinite library of stories, being written simultaneously. Her job was simply to help people find the books they needed, while ensuring they never forgot which story was theirs to write. It was, she reflected across multiple dimensions, the best job anyone could ask for, even if it required being dead first.
Welcome, traveler. We're glad you're here. Every story you hear is made with care and passion. If you enjoy it, please like, subscribe, and check out the other adventures waiting for you on our channel. Your support means the world. Thank you. We hope you enjoy the story.
Humanity Galactic Frontiers, all rights reserved. This video and its contents are protected under international copyright law. Any unauthorized copying, distribution, or re-uploading is strictly prohibited without written permission. If you enjoyed this journey, please like the video and subscribe for more stories from the edge of the galaxy. Thanks for watching, and stay curious out there among the stars.